Buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutti. Grazie di essere intervenuti. Io farò un brevissimo saluto, soltanto permettetemi di ringraziarvi a titolo personale, a nome della Banca Europea per gli Investimenti, di essere intervenuti oggi. Siamo qui oggi per lanciare InvestEU, il nuovo programma dell'Unione Europea che vuole aumentare gli investimenti, sostenere la ripresa e preparare l'economia per il futuro. Avremo nel corso della giornata l'opportunità di conoscere meglio gli obiettivi e il funzionamento di questo nuovo strumento. Io non voglio rubare ulteriore spazio ai nostri illustri ospiti. Permettetemi semplicemente di dire un grazie ad Antonio Parenti, a tutto lo staff della Commissione Europea, a Carlo Corazza e a tutto lo staff dell'Ufficio Italiano del Parlamento Europeo, che ci ospitano oggi qua nello spazio Europa di Roma e che hanno cooperato con i colleghi della BEI, e in particolare Elena Cammilli e Lorenzo Squintani, per la realizzazione di questo evento. Grazie mille e ora prego la vicepresidente della Banca Europea per gli Investimenti, la dottoressa Gelsomina Vigliotti.
The Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Gelsomina Vigliotti, to start our meeting. Good morning, everybody. Minister, Commissioner Gentiloni, CEO of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, Scanapieco. Dear guests, it's a pleasure for me to be here in Rome to open on behalf of the EIB, the InvestEU Roadshow, which together with the EU Commission, we will be presenting in all countries in Europe. Before introducing this initiative, I'd like to stress the importance of the establishment of this meeting with the presence of the most important representatives of the organizations we cooperate with to fund the Italian economy. It's been a long-lasting cooperation. Since 1999, the EIB has funded more than 2,600 projects in Italy, amounting 250 billion euros, which has allowed us to fund major projects and to reach and support many large and small economic and financial entities in the country. After more than 2 years of remote meetings, we're meeting in person to consider the new instruments made available by the EU to promote a green, digital and fair economy. Investments cannot be prescribed from Brussels or Luxembourg. Investments in new projects derive from the reality of local areas, and our mission as the Bank of the European Union is to sustain local areas in order to fund digital and green transition throughout Europe, to contribute to the achievement of European policy goals and to promote cohesion. And we're here today in Rome in order to bring initiatives like InvestEU to the entrepreneurial industrial fabric of Italy, to explore the new possibilities for investment and advisory facilities made available by the EIB. InvestEU was established in order to make European investment programs even more simple, accessible, and easier to understand. It is based on the success of previous programs such as COSME, Innofin, Connecting Europe Facilities, or the Plan for the Investments in Europe, better known as the Juncker Plan. The Juncker Plan was a real turning point for European financial architecture. When it was launched in 2015, many experts were, to say the least, skeptical. We've been told many times that it was impossible to mobilize investments for more than 50 billion, but we actually exceeded the goals we set ourselves. We've combined the resource of the European Union with funding, experience, and the know-how of the EIB group in order to mobilize private investment throughout the European Union. We can say that the Juncker Plan has now been a great success because, according to EIB estimates, it will contribute to grow European GDP by 2.4%. In Italy alone, within the Juncker Plan, 114 projects were approved for 13.1 billion euros, which should activate investments for 66 billion. The expectations for InvestEU are equally ambitious, with a budget guarantee of 26.2 billion euro. InvestEU aims at mobilizing investments for more than 62 billion in the real economy to support the strategic priorities of the European Union, like Green Deal and digital transition. Unfortunately, today we're faced by unprecedented challenges which nobody could have foreseen when InvestEU was first conceived. We were at another historical period when, having overcome the major financial crisis, we thought of how to overcome the medium-term economic prospects in Europe. The pandemic and then the war have changed the scenario drastically, but not our goals. Only economic choices which aim towards a sustainable and innovative economy promoting social inclusion can allow us to overcome the crisis and to maintain solid basis for economic recovery. The requisite anti-cyclical short-term measures have to be accompanied by investment decisions which make the economy increasingly resilient. The scope of the shocks which have affected the European industrial economies have been huge. We've moved from a war against a virus to a real war, and to protect our territories. And it's a war which has generated the largest inflow of refugees in Europe from the world wars, which has led to an unprecedented energy crisis and a food crisis in the most fragile countries in the world. The response of to the energy crisis for us, which call ourselves the climate bank of the European economy, we need to diversify our energy input, and in the short, medium, and long term. Today, more than ever, we need to increase investments in renewables, energy efficiency, and new green technologies in order to face the climate crisis and to make Europe independent from investments from Russia, and to make the European economy more resilient, autonomous, and competitive. The InvestEU program will allow us to sustain more risky projects which normally we would not be able to fund with EIB resources, and which will allow us to launch investments in a number of critical and strategic areas. InvestEU will contribute to increasingly promote investments in the green and digital area, to strengthen leadership of the European Union in research, development, and innovation. Also in the sectors of human and life sciences, and also to promote the ecosystem of startups in Europe. The pillars on which InvestEU is based are aimed to make the whole of the European Union stronger and more resilient to shock. And 30% of the overall financial assets will contribute to the EU climate goals. I'd like to conclude by saying that today, not only we're producing financial and advisory products from the EIB, but we're forming the first 4 major Italian transactions benefiting from the EIB guarantee. This will refer to water management, circular economy, and promote SMEs. Priorities to relaunch the economy for the EU. Thank you very much for being with us at this event, and I'd like to give the floor with great pleasure to Minister Daniele Franco.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Thank you, Vice President Vigliotti, Commissioner Gentiloni, Mr. Scannapieco, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you in order to take part in the launch of the InvestEU program. Being here is another sign of the ongoing cooperation which in Italy, the Italian government has with the European Commission, which assigns an important role to the EIB as a major partner with InvestEU. The complex, difficult crisis we're facing should not make us lose sight of the fundamental medium, long-term goals for our economies and societies. There are 3 I'd like to mention. First of all, to build structurally stronger economies. In the Italian case, this means especially emerging from the long time of weak growth and stagnation which has characterized our economy over the last 20 years at least. And this means investments, more productivity, and higher employment rates. Secondly, we must manage climate transition. And thirdly, we need to grow the economies of our country. InvestEU is based on the successful model of the European Fund for Strategic Investments. The fund, established in 2014, was based on an innovative model which allowed us to mobilize hundreds of millions of private investments throughout the European Union. Here I'd like to stress that Italy was the second beneficiary of the fund after France, with a total funding from EFSI for strategic investments equal to around 13 billion. And this has raised another 37 billion in investments, is a significant result. EFSI is a fundamental point of reference for the ways in which projects of public interest have been achieved. We expect the same from its success, InvestEU. As we know, the effects of Russia's aggression against Ukraine are widespread and marked. In particular, the war has made it more urgent to achieve strategic autonomy with technology and food security center stage. In the meantime, the green transition of Europe, which we already needed to support to combat climate change, is even more urgent, and we need to also recover the effects of the emergency measures we had to take. For example, the increase in use of coal. Sustainable growth and strategic autonomy are therefore two faces of the same issue. To make our energy systems less dependent on Russia and to deal with the climate crisis, it's essential to strengthen investments in energy efficiency, renewables, and green energy. Given the scale of the investments required and the limitations on public resources available, the involvement of the private sector will be essential. InvestEU can play an important role when private investment is not enough to reach the requisite scale of investments. Furthermore, the investment of intrinsically risky investments as in innovative sectors is essential, because it is necessary to support private investment in these risky investments. Also important to cooperate with national promotion agencies. Their knowledge of the market and skills are crucial to promote investments, so they're far-sighted and well-targeted. In the month of July, the first contribution agreement within the InvestEU advisory hub between European Commission and CDP, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. CDP was the first national promotion agency to sign a direct agreement with the European Commission within one of the three pillars of InvestEU. The participation in FC of CDP was fundamental and will also be for InvestEU. There's a growing interest on the part of investments on high technology industry. Innovation is essential also to achieve climate change goals. According to the EIB report, half of the actions required to achieve carbon neutrality require technological measures which are not yet achieved. Startups and therefore high-tech companies are very important in order to reach the ambitious goals of the Green Deal program. And I'm glad to have the opportunity today to be present at the launch of the first three projects launched in Italy with the support of InvestEU. Important sectors: water supply, management of wastewaters, and waste management, extending the lifetime of products and raw materials, biodiversity protection, and SMEs and CAPs in the areas of environmental sustainability and cultural and sports activities. To conclude, I'd like to say that InvestEU is a very suitable measure to combine community policies with national investment policies. And it's also suitable to guarantee the continuing economic recovery, green growth, and promotion of well-being throughout Italy and Europe with measures that can promote true benefits for our population. Our cooperation with European institutions in this area will continue. Thank you all for your attention.
Adesso la parola al dottor.
And now we leave the floor to the European Commissioner for Economy, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni. Thank you all. Thank you also to Antonio Parenti and to the Office of the Representation in Italy of the European Commission. This is somehow my Roman office, so I really feel at home here, and thanks to Migliotti, to Franco, Scannapiecco, Clerici, all the participants, I think that a launch like this one with such authoritative participants is also conveys the fact that Italy, also in the previous version of this program, wishes to play a central role and be at the forefront. As Vigliotti was saying, we are carrying out a roadshow with meetings in several European capitals. And maybe the mantra of this roadshow is our commitment, despite the crisis, despite the difficulties, to look at the future. And so to look ahead and bet on investments. Investments that are essential, as Minister Franco was just saying, because of the major transitions that are at stake, the ecological one, the digital one, are essential for the quality of our social model, and they are increasingly essential for what we call the strategic autonomy of Europe. In other words, we must make sure that we will not repeat the mistakes that unfortunately in the aftermath of financial crisis occurred. If we look at the evolution of financial investments after financial crisis, we see that in the last decade, public investments decreased. At the end of the previous decade, it was 0.8 of GDP, so less than the levels of public investments in the previous decade, and significantly less than the public investments made in countries such as the United States or Japan. We cannot afford nowadays a decline in investments vis-a-vis the crisis we are facing. The European Commission, of course, carries out a lot of estimates and calculations, and we come up with many scenarios. And according to our analysis, we are going to need we would need 520 million euros in extra investment per year for the next 10 years for the climate transition, and 130 million euros in extra investments per year for the digital transition. Of course, they are largely private investments. So it is a matter of proper regulations, of taxonomies, of green bonds, in order to make sure that this demand in investments follows precise rules and fast tracks. These investments inevitably will also have to be public investments, so we will deal with that somehow when we will review the rules of the Stability Pact. How can we find incentives, find forms to introduce investments. Yes, it is mainly private investments, but we need to be aware of the fact that in certain areas, the investment is either public or the ecological transition and the digital transition will prove to be extremely difficult. So we need to find a mechanism to make sure that also the countries that have more limited room for maneuver at budget level, investments, there can be incentives for a good quality of public spending, keeping debt under control, but also promoting investments. The public-private relationship, which is at the heart of the InvestEU project, is essential from this perspective. And Ms. Vigliotti was reminding us that when this operation was initially launched, there was some skepticism in the air. Oh, yes, the European Commission always makes this sort of magic numbers. There was skepticism, but facts have proven that this operation worked. A few months ago, President Juncker was complaining, saying that back in the days when it was called the Juncker Plan, everyone was complaining, and now that it is working, the name has been changed. He would have rather had it still called Juncker Plan, but of course we decided to call it InvestEU, a 26 billion guarantee, and we know that these multipliers, which of course are demanding in the current economic context, but these are not just numbers thrown out there, they are real projects. And it is important that this morning we are launching the first 3 projects in Italy that were earlier mentioned. Allow me to also emphasize the fact that in this operation, the European Commission and the EIB are working wonderfully together in Italy as well, because we were one of the most active countries. We managed to attract these types of investments and mobilize private investments as well. One of the novelties of InvestEU is the fact that not only the EIB remains the main European partner, but also the national banks are involved, and so the Italian CDP and similar institutions that exist in the main European countries. And on this point too, I think that it is a very positive fact, the fact that the first agreement with the national promotion banks is going to be signed with CDP, with this guarantee agreement that will be signed, and then similar agreements will be signed in Germany, France, Poland, and all the countries that have similar institutions in place. Well, it is important that not only all the power of the EIB is at play here, but also the deep knowledge of the national territory that institutions such as CDP have. And of course, Mr. Scannapieco used to work at the EIB and is now the CEO of CDP, so there is a continuity from all perspectives. So I think this is good news. The situation is very difficult, but on top of the various instruments that are in place, we are also trying to use this track of European investments that are European, but that will have a strong Italian dimension. We know that winter will be difficult, that the inflation, the prices of energy create a difficult economic context, we always ask countries to respond to these emergencies to as far as possible with temporary and targeted measures, meaning not an excessive strain on public finances, but also not something that may possibly damage the climate transition. And the Italian government in this period has really worked hard to abide to this approach. And when we look at the future, we know that there are various instruments in place and which should help us in facing the current difficulties, as long as, number one, we manage to stick to the scheduled time when it comes to the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, because anyone who has an experience with reforms and programs in our country knows how hard it is to achieve this. We also need more solidarity. After all, it is what we did after the pandemic crisis. Initially, there was a huge competition. All the member states were adopting their own approach, and it is inevitable that this happens, and it is happening again now with the energy crisis. Initially, countries tend to respond on their own, but in fact, from the point of view of energy and of financial resources, it is essential that we have common instruments in place, because in the given geopolitical context, we cannot afford the so-called fragmentation, or we cannot afford that European countries are divided. It is a matter of investing in the future, of not letting the difficulties of the present damaging our future. And the future is InvestEU. InvestEU talks about the future, and it is wonderful that we are launching this project here in Rome. Thank you.
Parola ora a Dario Scannapieco.
And now we'll leave the floor to Mr. Dario Scannapieco, CEO of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. Thank you, Commissioner Gentiloni, Minister Franco, Deputy President Vigliotti. Good morning to you all. I am extremely pleased of being here, of seeing so many friends and colleagues from the European Commission, from the IB. We worked for long together. Allow me to sincerely thank the European Commission and Commissioner Gentiloni for hosting this event at the Italian headquarters of the European Commission. And yes, this is the Roman office of Commissioner Gentiloni, but it's also the home of Europe, of all European citizens here in Italy. And also thank you to Vice President Vigliotti for organizing this event together with the Commission, and for the great commitment of the EIB to give visibility to Italy in Europe. You are doing an amazing work, and we are deeply grateful to you for that. And also thank you to Minister Franco, who has always accompanied our dialogue with Europe. As Commissioner Gentiloni said, in a short while, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti will be signing the first guarantee agreement within the InvestEU program. CDP has already signed back in July a contribution agreement with the Commission, again under the InvestEU umbrella, but as a part of advisory hub, which is one of the branches of InvestEU. The agreement signed in July and the one that we're signing today are really the beginning of a new era in the relationship between the CDP and the European Commission, and in general of the relationship between Europe and the national promotion institutes, the public banks that exist at national level. And because this relationship gives national investment banks a greater potential to reach the targets through mechanisms such as InvestEU. InvestEU was the so-called Juncker plan. It will mobilize 372 million euros in resources by 2027, so as to create jobs and contribute to the recovery of the European economy. As Commissioner Gentiloni said, again, there is a difference here with InvestEU vis-à-vis the Juncker plan. If we think of the role of a national promotion bank such as the CDP, 25% of the guarantee out of the 75% of the guarantee that is managed by the EIB, that 25% can be directly destined to the national banks such as the CDP. This is a very important novelty for national promotional banks because not only it acknowledges the fact that these actors are essential, the protagonists at the European level, but also allowing these banks to consolidate their activities also thanks to European resources. It is very important to create a synergy between the resources and competencies of the EIB and the resources of promotional banks. We have many examples of successes. For example, another initiative launched by the Commission as to respond to the pandemic crisis with the guarantee fund. And through the Italian banking system, we will be able to provide funds to many Italian SMEs that otherwise would have had huge difficulties in accessing loans. So it is extremely important that we emphasize this important nexus between European Commission, the EIB, and national promotional banks. And as Paolo was saying, we know the national markets, the regional markets, we know the gaps. And so we can play as CDP an important role in terms of the implementation of the program. From our side at CDP, I am proud to say that right from the moment the program was launched, we committed to play a primary role in its implementation. Not only did we sign the contribution agreement, today we'll be signing a guarantee agreement for investments in venture capital up to 520 million euros, and we are also working on 2 further guarantee agreements that are in an advanced negotiating phase with the Commission. One for the Margaret III Fund, and the other will be an agreement for 300 million euros that will allowing us to support investments for up to 700 million euros. So again, we have an important leverage effect. We are also participating to the program's steering committee as one of the 2 national partners that are not the EIB for the first mandate, with a very inclusive approach aimed at coming up with a common strategy at the European level. As I said, in the incoming weeks, we hope that we'll be signing these 2 further guarantee agreements so that we can finance investments that of high quality to support the Italian and European economy and strengthen the role of the CDP within the context of the European guarantees. The guarantees program is very important because it allows CDP to finance a more risky projects, which are the ones that have a greater impact normally on the economy, but that the financial system has greater difficulties in supporting. So the role of the CDP in conjunction with the European guarantee is extremely important. And to conclude, the involvement of CDP in InvestEU is an important example of the fact that our relationship with the EIB and with the European Commission is a long-term strategic one in order to promote inclusive growth in Italy and Europe. This is why it is very important to be there in Brussels, but also to constantly exchange experiences and best practices with our peers. Last week, I signed an agreement with KfW. We have regular relationships with France, with Spain and many others, so that we can exchange our expertise and create synergies at the European level. We are also trying to strengthen our presence in Brussels so that we can have a constant dialogue with the European Commission on matters of common interest. Our strength has to do with the role we play in Europe and our function in Italy, because we try to multiply the European possibilities in the national territory. Our mission is that of supporting the Italian economy and Italian growth, which will be stronger if it will be managed in agreement with our European partners. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And now we'll make a short switch, a couple of minutes break, and we'll prepare for the signature of the projects which are to be funded.
No, mi dispiaceva, in genere gli eventi di firma sono sempre degli eventi in cui, diciamo, in qualche maniera, tra virgolette, celebriamo anche l'operazione e come dicevamo prima nell'introduzione, l'inizio del roadshow di InvestEU in Italia è anche particolare perché stiamo firmando delle operazioni con cui applichiamo la garanzia dell'Unione Europea e ci fa molto piacere iniziare con questo investimento con Acque Bresciane, un investimento nel settore idrico che sappiamo quanto rilevante è in Italia, ma non solo in Italia e in Europa, e avere delle istituzioni, delle imprese, degli assetti societari come Acque Bresciane che attraverso i loro investimenti riescono anche a fare efficientamento energetico, oltre che impatto ambientale, è sicuramente un obiettivo di grande rilevanza e noi come BEI siamo molto felici di accompagnare iniziative come queste, soprattutto con la garanzia dell'Unione Europea. Non so se il commissario vuole
No, noi siamo ovviamente felici e onorati, tra l'altro è la prima.
We're very happy. And I hope this is the first of a long series of operations we'll be carrying out with the EIB in Italy. And I think it's also useful to hear from Commissioner Del Barba, not to explain the whole project, but no, thank you. It's an honor to be here, of course, and to benefit from this significant contribution. The issue of water is very significant on the agendas of all areas in the country. For years now in Brescia, we've been facing a major environmental challenge, and we've started having wastewater treatment as a major emphasis. There are major environmental issues which we have responded to in recent years, and today climate change provides us with another challenge, and the issue of energy and the cost of energy for us have more than doubled. And it's an issue which we're facing up to in situation of drought and water shortage, and this is something which, thanks to this contribution, we'll be trying to find solutions and measures which live up to expectations.
Nella migliore delle tradizioni della BEI ci facciamo.
So we'll take a photo now with the signature of the contract.
Grazie mille.
Grazie a voi.
Many thanks.
Grazie ancora.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci, grazie, alla prossima.
Magari se posso gentilmente chiedervi di accomodarvi, siamo un po' più ordinati, a parte i fotografi. Grazie, passiamo adesso alla seconda.
So we move on to our second operation.
Buongiorno.
Good morning. As was said previously, we're now reached the signatures of contracts. The first contract, which signed in Italy, investment in an equity fund, Chile. It's a very Italian team. Name doesn't sound very Italian, and it's a fund for decarbonization of the circular economy, so energy transformation, green economy, fair economy, and this is the focus of this operation. Very glad to be involved. The AF with InvestEU funds is investing 30 million in a fund which has a 120 million target. Does recycling, invests in companies doing material recycling, energy transition, renewables, development of green infrastructure. So that's exactly what we needed. The focus of the fund is enabling technologies, so not plant. We have a 30-year history of private equity, and with 30 years which we've been invested in Italy, the name's foreign, but we have a large amount of funds from foreign investments, particularly Americans. We invested this. We invented it because it wasn't covered by anybody, and they actually copied it elsewhere. So it's consistent with our history, and we manage funds, follow capital gains, and 32 years of statistics. We have plus 122% if we compare human resources when we enter into a company and when we exit it. So satisfaction in terms of quality. And I think this is very much consistent with the venture capital logic more than private equity logic, but we've always been, even well before it was popular, to give it attention to human resources, to nurture them, to convince them to come and work with us.
Bene, benissimo.
Very well. Let's move from the waters of Brescia to Zenon and private equity, to Zenon and private equity. And this gives us a feel for all the potential there is in the InvestEU program. And therefore, I would like to thank the EIF and the IB and the European Commission for this new agreement, Xenon.
Sì, infatti probabilmente.
Well, probably we haven't stressed the contribution of the IF in carrying out InvestEU projects and the contribution to the capital market of EIF, supporting the ecosystem of startups, which accompanies these enterprise investments. EIF has given a major impulse to these activities, and this will be increasingly important as we move towards an economic slowdown. So having an anchor investment which can guide the market and give stability to the market, that will be very important. Off we go.
E questo è il secondo.
So that's the second contract. We're now on loan guarantees for SMEs. This is the second leg of the EIF activity, also covered by InvestEU. We're signing 2 contracts, actually, amounting to 100 million with Intesa San Paolo to sustain investments in SMEs and small caps, innovative, and to support digital and green transition. So there's an initial part of this contract which is addressed to innovation, digitalization. The second one, sustainability. Same topics as previously. We're now speaking of the debt side, which is a component, essential component in the SME area. Thank you, Mr. Cappi. Commissioner, Vice President in our common home. In the initial phase, we celebrated a good start for us. And this signature, this agreement represents continuity. We're continuing from initiatives which sewed us very positively together to sustain local economies. And we're now turning a new page to support the local economies. Previously, we were saying the economy originates in local areas for local areas. This is our function. The function of a bank is to be an actor which demultiplies and uses public guarantees as best as possible with its own involvement in risk to promote growth. Yes, previously we were talking about innovation, sustainability. This means first growth, employment, sustaining households and enterprises. The complementarity process has to become an ongoing process which sees public and private together in this challenge for the future. Today, we plan to generate investments amounting to 250 million. This is just the beginning. We do have the conditions to do more, and we do have the resources and full willingness to make available all possible actions to extend this kind of initiative. So thank you for this initiative, and thank you for our future cooperation. Many thanks. We have another important area of activity, cooperation with the EIF and a major banking institution in Italy. I think that these are 2 interesting things. The first thing is that all these projects obviously with their own features have the possibility of demultiplying these investments, so moving from European level guarantees to roles and partners, and the multiplication of investments and actors. And you can also see priority given to climate environmental transition, which is one of the new features in the InvestEU program, where which we've inserted to all programs a threshold for initiatives focusing on environmental transition. So this is a major opportunity, Vice President. Many thanks. And with this signature, I think we can say we've completed the main instruments with which EIB and European Commission can sustain economic activities. Financial intermediaries have a essential role, as was said previously by the representative of Banca Intesa, fundamental role to reach out to SMEs which are among the main beneficiaries of the funds of EIB, and obviously to reach these entities, we need a capillary presence in the local environments, which is something which only large and small banking and financial entities can extend to. And we spoke previously of the importance of public intervention to reduce the degree of risk of investments where there may be market failures, where there may be risks which wouldn't be taken without a public guarantee, where the end product is very important. This is truly the real additionality which public involvement can provide. And so I think with this operation, we're confirming not just major cooperation with Banca Intesa, which is decades long, but the fact we're carrying out in two areas such as environmental diversification and digitalization is very important.
E questo è l'ultimo passo di questi primi.
This is the last step of this first few steps we're taking from an international bank and a regional one, Mediocredito Trentino Alto Adige, who's had a long tradition of cooperation with the EIF, with the aim of supporting SMEs in the northeast of Italy. Of course, the EIF does not work directly with SMEs. We work with financial intermediaries, so our role stops here. We have done our analysis of the approach that the bank intends to approach, and now it is up to the bank to start putting the operations in place. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to you all. Allow me to also thank the staff at EIF. They have been supporting us for years. We are a small entity, just about 100 people. So we were initially a little bit concerned that Europe was something too difficult for us. But in recent years, we have managed to handle important investments instead. So and today we could even help out other banks because of the expertise we've been building up. So we really are there to prove that when you're truly committed, even banks that are not too big can use it best. The opportunities coming from Europe, opportunities that we intend to transfer to our economy, which is not just the local one, but it's the macro-regional one of the Veneto, but also Lombardy, Emilia. And through mini bonds and partly through equity, we wish to support this economy in terms of growth and employment perspectives for the whole macro region. So thanks to the EIB and to Europe for this opportunity. We are not to prove that not even the bigger banks, that only bigger banks can do this. Okay, thank you. I think that these operations stand there to prove that we really have highly diversified tools in our hands. And not only geographically diverse, but also in terms of the size of the operations. So it means that the mechanism works. And I think this is the main message for this morning and for the work ahead. Thank you. Thank you for this operation. I would like to emphasize not just the aspects that we've already mentioned, the geographical proximity, the role of financial intermediaries, not even of also medium-sized intermediaries, but also another aspect of InvestEU, which is the support to social, cultural and leisure activities. We know that Mediocredito Trentino will partly use this opportunity to support cultural and leisure programs, which are very important for the social cohesion of our regions and for the human capital of our territories. So this too is something that should be emphasized through European funding. This is also what we managed to achieve. Thank you.
Me ne abbiamo tanti di festival.
Grazie ancora a tutti.
Thank you. Thanks to Commissioner Gentiloni, to our Vice President. And now we'll have a coffee break. And we'll come back here to discuss the guarantee fund in detail.
Che funzionino. Prova a farlo.
Per a me già ho.
Esatto. Ok, ci mette 3 secondi. Infatti, guarda, se lo accendiamo tutti e due, vedi che il mio non funziona, funziona solo il tuo. Quindi dobbiamo essere bravi.
Signori, potete entrare per favore che inizia la sessione.
Can you take your seats, please, because the session's starting.
Allora invito le persone che
I'd like to call on those of you who are outside to enter and take your seats.
Beh, anche tu, mettiamo un po' dentro. No, vado. Come preferite. Allora, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everybody. Let's wait for the last people to enter the room.
Benissimo.
Excellent. So good morning. I'm Svetsa. I'm responsible for European Parliament relations here in Rome. Commission's been mentioned a number of times. A bit envious because these areas also managed with the European drawn up 3 days ago. The Elena Tinelli, who's president of the ECOM Committee of the European Parliament, was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, she was held up by institutional commitments. At the European Parliament, together with our friends of the Commission in these Italian offices, pay a lot of attention to the appreciation of citizens to the institution. And we now see that this appreciation collapsed before the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. And it's recovered considerably because all citizens have noticed that the action of the European Union provided a very effective response to the economic crisis with the purchase on the part of ECB of Italian gilts. And we're now sliding back a bit because citizens perhaps see that the institutions haven't responded properly to the energy crisis, which may be causing very serious effects on our continent. So we believe that moments like this are very important, and citizens have to be aware what the EU do for the economy and for growth. And the European Parliament, European Commission in this area, organizing regional sessions, which the EIB also is involved in. The first one within Emilia-Romagna on 10th of October with the presence of the president of the region and economic entrepreneurs, so the citizens can be explained and entrepreneurs can be involved in our activity. Now I give the floor to our two speakers, Fabio Pamolli, who's chairperson of the InvestEU Investment Committee and lecturer in finance at the Politecnico in Milan, Martino Colombo, who's national expert seconded to the European Commission. She comes from CDP. So I'd like to reverse the rule that women should speak first, but giving the floor to Fabio Pamolli. Thank you, thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you today. And some initial comments. I'll be trying to provide some comments, so there'll be nothing systematic like the people who spoke before. My idea is to provide you with a few indications. I had the privilege of being a member of the FC Investment Committee, or the Juncker Plan, as it's also been called. And at that time, I was asked to be chairperson of the investment committee. So I do have memory of those initiatives. So some comments. I'd like to admit that for the initial part of InvestEU's life, I saw possible crowding out with relation to other lines, because the interest rate levels and the expectations and discussion on the so-called zero lower bound, the expectation of high multipliers and grant-based actions seemed to be something which was established. Just look back to where we stood a year ago, and this led to a problem for two reasons. First of all, because the use of financial instruments and the use of financial instruments combined with public guarantees or matching funds is a long-term effort which also requires institutional change, both in national promotional banks and institutions, also inside the EIB. We at the investment committee in FC or the EIFC saw that there was great reactivity with regard to special activities, which involved a major capability of reviewing all the documents underpinning additionality. So large interaction between investment committees and banks. These aren't things which can be done overnight. Another change, even more significantly, perhaps occurs in the national promotional banks, which don't have such a consolidated structure as CDP has today, and even more at the level of member states, because the interplay between the various components is a major one. I'll come back to this later. So a long-term change and major compression on the in the short term, because recovery and post-COVID situation led to an effect of both congestion and displacement. The macroeconomic scenario has changed drastically, unfortunately. Inflation in the United States has a number of grounds which differ from those in Europe, but in any case triggers a spiral of transmission of inflationary processes. This is something which changes the expected impact of the multipliers of public expenditure. This is one of the clear signs we have, is that when we're clear to zero lower bound and while the level of indebtedness on GDP is reduced and there are other indicators, there is a multiplier which sometimes is greater than 1. In other cases, we go below 0.8, 0.7. So this means that the financial instruments which the Commission and the IB, so FC and InvestEU, provide to the European Union is a suite of instruments which is very impressive in terms of public finance. When we speak of fiscal facility in the European Union, I would say that we need to revise the notion of fiscal facility so as to take into account the multiplier effects and the leverage and multiplier effects brought about by the guarantee of the Union and the use of financial instruments. And this is an initial point. Up to 6 months ago, all the attention in Brussels was on discussing and renewing the clauses of the Stability and Growth Pact. I think this is something which is still very topical, but there's also strategic significance. So as an economist with the first of the two hats, I have to be noted as a frame for what we have. As you know, in FC and in InvestEU, the function of the experts committee is an independent feature, and they're called upon to carry out very complex exercises, because we're also carried out to undertake counterfactual analyses, which are not very simple, but the idea is to have independent bodies which challenge the services of the implementing partner and which contributes, at least in my wishful thinking, also to the improvement of the production of evidence to support the lines of investment. Obviously, additionality issues are many. The first is the non-financial contribution, and reacting to the IB and CDP has on operators, because there's a quality component linked to that. And I can list a few. Maturity, which are not necessarily usually accessible, durations which aren't generally accessible to the banking partners in certain operations, which are things which are corporate linked, for example. And these kinds of exercise, obviously the risk profiles I mentioned previously. There's no need for me before this audience for me to go into the issue of additionality. But there's one thing which is important and which has a major impact on the role and interpretation of which we've considered in recent months. It's been demonstrated, first of all, that by the signing of certain agreements, there are components which are based on what we in the economy call a distributed intelligence, the possibility of defining a framework and then making use of the assessment capabilities of the intermediaries and the partners which have local and market information. So we have to carry out additionality assessments, consider whether that investment would have been possible even without using the guarantee. And obviously, in that case, the instrument isn't approved. It's not eligible for the guarantee. But once we define the framework, we have platforms. We call them platforms. With the FC, these were defined as framework operations. We've approved a number for dozens of billions of euros over these recent months, and this has been an interpretation of the role of the investment committee in its new configuration, because I personally stress the need for a rigorous evaluation of all eligibility conditions, and also to delegate the execution to the implementing partner. Otherwise, the investment committee would be a source of increase of transaction costs. So it would be a place of a bureaucratic weight. And this is important because moving from internal governance internal to the EIB to a governance which has significant properties with an intrinsic opening to a variety of implementing partners has positive consequences. With regard to the goal I was mentioned, having distributed capacities throughout the European Union, but also involves operational complexities which can be seen. So from the point of view of the investment committee, I think that coming months, I don't know whether at the regulatory level, and I don't want to give you a view of someone who sees the flows and sees some processes. What you've seen at AFSI, this dynamic with regard to the cost of transaction. For example, the modes in which policy checks are carried out, the modes in which the interaction between directorates general takes place, and the load of information the counterparts are requested are features which probably in a time of rising interest rates will have different cost benefits and will have but which also imply transaction costs which may represent slowdown on the execution of the operations, not necessarily increasing the quality of the projects, because we'll need to wait to see the changes in the number of false positives. Unfortunately, I think there'll be an increased number of false negatives, namely the number of projects which don't come to the investment committee because the cost of transaction to reach that table has become too high. So this is a point which I wanted to bring up. And I wanted to dispel any doubts or uncertainties on this point. I mentioned initially that opening the architecture, opening to a variety of implementing parties is a value, an asset for this initiative. The other point is really being caught between two fires. On the one hand, we have the specter of state aid. Sometimes this is amplified when we go to the member state level. The recent statement from ANAC reassured me with regard to an interpretation I presented a few months ago unsuccessfully. Thankfully, ANAC came up with an interpretation which supported my position, but the number of false negatives had increased. This is Scylla, one of the fires, and the other one is that once I have a guarantee, I need to have a market price for that guarantee. And the second extreme clashes a bit with the fact that we are trying to contribute to the common good, trying to deal with forms of market failure. So this is something which can't be solved in this room. It can't be solved easily, but it's something which is being discussed with inside the Commission, and which can find a solution in the technical solution, the investment partners and the technical committee. I don't think that this will be that there'll be a solution which can be found at the level of policy framework or at the political level. And this concerns governance too. So the idea that we have framework operations which imply delegation to the implementing partners, I'm not saying this should become the rule, because in some major operations does not occur. But with operations which have an effect on on distributed assets, we need to grow all the implementing partners which don't necessarily have this ability to manage complex operations. Otherwise, we have a second problem, the fact that the financial operations and systems used follow a path of least resistance. And so we can't fully explore the potential of all these financial instruments or the possible diversity in the use of instruments. I emphasize reporting requirements. Two final comments. First of all, if the crisis situation continues, probably a similar solution to the TEMP2 framework set at the macro level has to be, will be needed for financial instruments. There has to be a fast track which will make it possible to deploy these actions, taking into account the emergency condition. My final consideration is that if we consider the elements of additionality used by the investment committee in order to assess additionality, with respect to what I was saying previously, whether the operation is possible without the guarantee. If we apply this same logic to the grant funding lines, we're saying that the public actor has to make use of relatively sophisticated instruments which do two things. First of all, a systemic cost-benefit analysis with regard to the intervention. Secondly, matching financial tools, guarantee design, the use of the guarantees, and the types of investment and the types of market failure. This kind of matching is currently not developed in a homogeneous manner in all countries, and the co-development of the relations between state and market prevents this from being carried out the same way or in all countries. If we look at protection of dams from possible floods in the Netherlands, we see that there's a succession of the centuries of guarantees and insurance. This is something which I feel we can raise in Italy, because in some lines of intervention, I'm thinking in particular of the transportation infrastructures, we've had peculiar situations where there are projects who had been set up with financial instruments and then had grant financial instruments which were orthogonal to what had been established in the other sector. This means that we need to consider this match between market failure and lines of intervention and lines of public intervention, and that this is a way to carry out two other things: contribute to macro additionality and also support micro additionality, because partner actions can contribute to the design of the investment lines, which grants on its own aren't able to generate. So these are my points for discussion. Having said that, I haven't told you what we're doing. We're working the pipeline of projects is increasing. We hope that we will work positively.
Allora ringrazio.
Thank you, Fabio Pamolli, and I leave the floor to Martina Colombo. Thank you, and good morning to you all. Yes, I too was perhaps privileged because I had a chance at seeing the evolution of this new way of using European resources that started with the Juncker plan. I defended this new methodology vis-a-vis certain critiques initially, because of course it takes time to come up with a method. Now with InvestEU we have learned a lesson. Of course there are new complexities. that have emerged, and the economy has changed and is undergoing disruptions. But nevertheless, as Fabio was saying earlier, it is our job to find solutions to respond to the needs of the moment with systems such as framework operations and platforms that can give enough freedom to our executive partners so that they can deliver on the implementation of the projects. So for what concerns the Juncker plan, I will not repeat the numbers because they have been mentioned already. Italy is a success case. We ranked first for a long time, and we still do when it comes to economies, thanks to the cooperation with the European Fund, with Europe, and thanks also to cooperation with the CDP. We have built together investment platforms that have helped in strengthening the funds made available at the European level through national funds as well. Now, the Juncker plan worked along a number of themes, which was infrastructure and innovation and SMEs. Here you have an example of an EIB loan to find treatments for neurological diseases, and another example on infrastructure, which was the Italy-France interconnector. And on the SME side, you see here a pretty articulated graph. It is of the CDP-IF platform, and this quite articulated structure that you can see that is the one that made it possible to use minimum public resources, hundreds of thousands of euros, through that using the leverage effect to actually support a huge number of SMEs. This articulated mechanism, with the contribution of the European Commission, of the European Fund, of CDP, of the Italian Ministry, allowed us to use the leverage effect and use little public resources to actually support a huge number of Italian SMEs. Now, InvestEU, it is a follow-up of the Juncker plan. It is organized along three lines: the guarantee fund, the advisory hub, and the InvestEU portal, which is the place where projects can have their visibility and investors can get to learn about them. The Guarantee Fund has mobilized 26 billion euros and in order to mobilize 370 billion in total. Here we have a specific target, which is 30% should go as a contribution to the achievement of climate objectives. And then all the investments to make sure that the European economy stays independent in the long term. The strategic projects are organized along 4 areas: sustainable infrastructure, research, innovation, and digitization, SMEs, and a new window, a new area, which is social and investment and skills. So an attention to the human capital. The InvestEU fund umbrella gathers together many investments under this single umbrella in order to facilitate access to funds. Now, What is the general scheme? Again, a pretty complex one. We have the InvestEU guarantee that is made available through an articulated governance mechanism, and it is made available to the executive partners. Those are, of course, the European Bank and the European Fund, whose target is the implementation of 75% of these resources. But then we have also the new executive partners in the measure of 25%. For example, in Italy, CDP as the national promotional institution. National promotional institutions already were collaborating with the Juncker plan through the investment platforms, but now there is a novelty, which is the fact that they can directly access the Commission funds. These executive partners are tasked with making sure that the final beneficiaries, in either through direct manner or through intermediaries, can use the funds. There is also another possibility, which is that of also using national resources to increase the resources made available in total. Here you see the InvestEU themes in terms of resources. The most important one is sustainable infrastructures with 9.9 billion euros made available. Then the SMEs, 6.9 billion. Research and innovation, pretty much the same amount, 6.6 billion. And then in social investment and skills, 2.8 billion euros. As I was saying just a second ago, the resources made available can be increased through the use of national resources as well, because the regulation makes it possible to add voluntary contributions to the InvestEU fund, either through European resources, so for example, in the NRPP, or through the own resources of the member state. So, and this means that the guarantees can be incremented or the resources can be increased in order to enhance the advisory services. So it is up somehow to the member state to decide if it wants to make this extra resources available and to use them together with the InvestEU resources in order to achieve the pre-established targets. Italy is not going for this option, but Romania, Finland, Greece, and the Czech Republic have, and others are being negotiated at the moment. So we have approved the 51 projects, many of them very important ones. Altogether, we are already covering 10 member states, but this will increase, and we have 18 potential new executive partners in Europe together to the EIB, including the CDP. And here you can see the 4 projects that were signed this morning. The last 2 slides concern the additional pillars besides the fund. This has been widely covered already, and the advisory hub services, which are supposed to accompany the project throughout its life cycle. Once again, the executive partners are the actors that are supposed to carry out, that are tasked with carrying out such advisory activity. And so in the initial phase of the project, for example, just supporting the definition of it, and then specific advisory during the implementation phase. And once again, here too, the CDB together with the EIB is an executive partner of the advisory hub. And then the InvestEU portal, which is has been made available so that promoters can reach out to international investors. Thank you for your attention.
Benissimo.
Very well. I'd like to thank our speakers. If anybody wants to put a quick question, I know that our speakers would be willing to answer. If, on the other hand, the presentation was clear and left no doubts, we'll move on to the next panel. So I'll thank our speakers. Let's call on Gilles Badeau, Alessandro Rizzo, and Bruno Rubino.
Mettetevi come preferite. Parlerei per primo?
Sì.
Benissimo.
Very well. So I'll give the floor to Gilles Badeau, who is director at the EIB, and he deals with operations in the Spanish, in the Iberia and the Adriatic Sea. Many thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today, because I think it's an important time. We're launching InvestEU, which will be the successor to the Juncker plan, which changed the IB in many ways. So I'd like to start out. I'm not sure how we can move on with the slides. I'd like to say that the IB is an institution which was established some time ago, and it's had to change its approach in order to sustain Italian and European economy in recent years with the Juncker plan. We talked about this, but the Juncker plan, I would like to stress, had an enormous impact on the way we approach risk and are capable of helping and supporting the economy. So we have succeeded in going out to SMEs through banks, but also to fund mid-caps. And this is a significant change which we've experienced with the Juncker plan. Oh, a good start. No, you can't have a conference without a small technical mishap, so we're just having ours. So in just a few words, this is the EIB. It's true that in the past, the EIB model was based on EIB raising resources on the market and then lending resources with a more conservative profile. With the Juncker plan, we've been able to go to more structured operations on the infrastructure, in the infrastructure sector. Alessandro Rizzo will be discussing this. We also began to fund the venture debt world, but in particular, and the most important thing for Italy is we managed to go directly to the mid-cap universe. The InvestEU fund creates, as Martina Colombo said, a somewhat simplified framework which allows us to manage these operations through the Union and allows us to have a single channel for the various mandates we had previously to support innovation or access to funding for SMEs, mid-caps, or structured operations. So the IB group, as was said, will be involved in developing operations around 75% of the guarantee from the InvestEU fund. And so there's a major focus on themes. And as the Union Bank, but also the Climate Bank, will be trying to act in order to sustain digitalization of Europe, but also the green transition, which is the challenge we have before us in Europe and worldwide. So the two major missions which we will have to act on with the InvestEU fund are those. As Martina said, there are 4 windows inside InvestEU. Sustainable infrastructure, which assesses projects linked to sustainable energy, digital connectivity, transportation, infrastructures. And then there's the research, infrastructure and digitalization, so innovation, where we'll be focusing on research and innovation projects, technology transfer, which is something which has shown itself to be very important during the COVID crisis. The small business aspect, this is something which the IF will be discussing mostly, which is part of the IB group and deals essentially with this aspect inside the group. And then the human capital compartment on training schools and universities and hospitals as well. So the EIB will focus, the EIB, the investment area will focus on 3 windows: sustainable infrastructure, research and development, and social investment and skills, whereas the IF will focus on the SME window. Move on to the next slide. Obviously, we'll do this in various ways. We could intervene through financial intermediaries or directly to fund corporate mid-caps, venture debt, project finance, or the public sector. So we have these 2 modes. As I said previously, the impact should be mostly social. We also have a major change in the economic scenario with the current issues, inflation, the energy crisis, the war on the doorstep of the union. So it's a very special situation where it is important for the EIB to show that we can support private and public initiatives in such complex circumstances, and also to mark European solidarity and support for all European countries. I want to give some concrete examples because we look at the projects, so it's important also to show what we've done. So I've taken 4 examples of projects which we funded with FC to show what we're capable of doing. This project with DeCecco is an important one because it's not typically the kind of company we would have been able to fund in the past. It's small, also requires significant time for us to manage this kind of operation. But when we think today of the general problem which we have with the increase of costs, it's also important to sustain companies which do all kinds of things in Italy. DeCecco, I think, is also an excellent example in terms of the Italian ability to be present worldwide. So through FC, we funded DeCecco in the cohesion zone, an area which is considered to be one of the less rich in Europe. We gave a 55 million role for modernization of the production line, which we think is important also to make the industrial instrument competitive. So there's a leverage effect which is considerable, more than double. So this project was well received, and we're going to work again with this company in future years. We also have taken action to sustain the industry because Italy's industrial compartment is very important. Italy is the second country in terms of industrial production capacity in Europe. So 30 million for Mermec, which is a company of excellence in the road sector, something which we did in FC, and we will be continuing to provide support through InvestEU. This is an example I'm very fond of. This is a company called Saviola, company which launched a brilliant idea of circular economy using used wood and changing it to high quality furniture with Italian design features, which is sold throughout Europe. For example, funding a company of this kind, which makes it possible to include on its production site the use of used materials is a very interesting idea. We're very proud to be working with this company, which we also supported with FC, and which we continue to intend to support in future years, just to show that it is also important to try to develop circular economy solutions. And this is something which is in line with the green transition, which I spoke of as a major goal for InvestEU. We also work with heavier industry companies. As part of the green transition, the IB is called on to help all sectors to adapt to new market conditions. The market in the future will obviously be very different because we will need to adapt to climate change conditions and also the new production requirements with less energy used and a more rational use of resources, and therefore reusing materials. And this is something which we think is emblematic of what we can do in the future too with InvestEU. So today we saw Acqua Brusciana, and this was the first operation which we signed in Italy with InvestEU. There are many others. There will be many others in future. What I want to say is that we have the mid-cap side, where obviously there's a new activity which we developed under the Juncker plan. And now I'd like to give the floor to Alessandro Izzo, who will be talking to us about the development activities in venture debt and structured finance areas. Thank you.
Grazie mille, Gilles.
Thank you, Gilles. And congratulations for your presentation. I remember when I was in Paris and I had to give my presentation in French, and I was really sweating. Congrats for your presentation. I am Alessandro Izzo, and I am the Director for Equity Growth, Capital and Project Finance at the EIB. And the way we are organized at my department really speaks of the impact that the deployment of mandates such as the FC1 has had on us. Basically, up until 2016, the risk activity of the EIB upon mandate was about 2%. And beyond mandate, it was 8 to 10%. With the Juncker plan, we reached 25% of percentage, and the vast majority of which is being supported by the FC. through strengthening products that already existed, and the creation of a product area that has accompanied the traditional equity activities of the FC, which is that of venture debt portfolio that is investing is almost 400 companies for a total of 3.5 million. So the determination to take on a greater risk, to enhance the impact of existing projects, and also a more radical prioritization of certain policy areas. So basically, at the moment, we can project within the various InvestEU windows the experiences of the Juncker plan. And now I will briefly describe two products that I think have the potential to continue the very positive experience of the Juncker plan. The first product area is that of venture debt. Here we must distinguish between the product, which is well known in the venture capital market in the US. It was accompanying the investments in venture capital that existed. Some venture debt funds existed in Europe, but the traction of this product in Europe was fairly underrepresented in 2014, when in Europe, with the help of certain consultants, we started studying the market gap for this type of product. It was an open, unventured territory in Europe. And with the help of the Commission, we have started tackling this matter. The first venture debt products as a facility, so a product where you can also have a share in the upside, so in the financial success of the company. It started with the first idea of facilities, but it was really scaled up during the Juncker plan under the venture debt window of the Juncker plan. As I said, the product, it is now fairly well known in the market. It supports not companies that are at the very early stage phase, but rather companies approaching their second capital phase. And in order to innovate technologically at business level and at products level. And it is a tool that keeps together 2 and 3 aspects that are typical of the EIB's DNA. On the one hand, the possibility of taking risks on time frame that is a little bit more extended than the market one. Maybe when in the market would be 3 to 4 years, we managed to cover up to the 5th and 6th year. It is a non-diluted product. It is the so-called patient capital, so it does not concern the governance of companies, and so basically allows those who have control of the company to maintain such control. And this tool is based on the InvestEU architecture on the basis of 2 different windows. One that is thematic, and the other where the risk is assessed as somehow little lower, which is defined as the market venture debt. But from the point of view of the customer, the product is the same, but the way it is absorbed within InvestEU is diversified. So the priorities are the so-called main policy priority areas. And here again, as you can see in this slide, we have the thematic product and we have the risk sharing venture debt product equivalent. And the lines are very important: future tech, digitalization, new technology, space technology, defense, robotics, artificial intelligence, supporting the green transition, and so green tech, circular economy, biotechs, green transition, and recharging networks and green mobility. Then the third window, which is very important, we're very proud of this at the EIB, the possibility of using this, the impact of this vertical facilities was very important. With the Juncker plan, we managed it, which allowed us to intervene vis-a-vis the pandemic crisis, and it is one that is dedicated to biotech, and in particular the development of vaccines. Had we not had a mandate from the previous commission that has now been absorbed through within InvestEU, we would have not been in a position to invest in BioNTech in order for it to develop the COVID-19 vaccine. In Italy, you have some examples of what we are supporting, and where we are to position ourselves in the future. Here you can see space technologies, the Orbit, a company that is doing very well. We may have an incredible exit in a very short time. Investments in MMI for robotics for microsurgery. Just here, last year, Impomezzo, just out of Rome, we signed last year this agreement with a biotech company who produce the COVID vaccine in Italy, and they have a research and innovation hub for the development of treatments and vaccines for infectious diseases. They have a huge research capacity, and it's an important biotech that was about to abandon the Italian market had this not happened. And then Moto K, which is active in the sector of software and digital platforms. This just to give you an idea of the portfolio that we've built up in the course of 4 years with Fabio and the investment committee. We approved the so-called framework approvals, which will now allow us to move to the executing phase for the new portfolio, hoping to replicate and multiply our success. Allow me to say one thing. The portfolio is very successful, but it is especially geographically diversified and diversified at sectoral level, and this diversification is different from the market one. There is a greater attention paid to filling the market gaps. And let us move on to the other activity that I would like to briefly discuss. Project finance has always had a fairly important franchise. It was developed in the UK in the 90s on PPE infrastructural activities. There was a paradigm shift, which is the diversifying assets, diversifying territories. We moved from an approach where there was basically no demand risk to diversifying all across European markets, taking on market risks. The windows here have already been described by Martin and some colleagues, but just I would like to mention some of the operations, some through InvestEU, some others are mandates that are about to be completed this year, but will be transferred to InvestEU after that. And it is investments in order to support renewable energy technologies, solar energy. These are entities that are very important in terms of our commitment to the needs of Italy. We have a few projects under negotiation. Unfortunately, we couldn't sign them this morning, but I believe that by the beginning of the next year we shall. So these structures where we will have a debt capital that will include both the construction risk and the revenue risks. And from the point of view of the revenues risk, the cash flows will be completely negotiated with both industrial promoters or financial promoters that will then resell the assets and have capital circulating, and also in partnership with debt funds that can intervene either at the level of the fund or of the underlying assets. Just to conclude, okay, I could have made examples such as the ones that were mentioned by Martina, the interconnectors, digitalization, but I wanted to mention these examples because they were supported with the previous mandate, but they tell us where the Italian market will be going in the next 12, 24 months. Projects of scaling up in Italy in order to have in Italy gigafactories so as to produce components of the renewable energies supply chain. We were the first financial partner in the development of the biggest European gigafactory for the at European level for the production of lithium batteries, and we did that with Northvolt. It was very interesting because we first funded the technology testing through the thematic windows, and then we moved on to the full implementation with the implementation of the 16 gigas of the gigafactory. And by the end of the project, this plant will produce about 20% of the batteries needed in Europe. Just to conclude, another very interesting case is that of floating energy in France. Again, working on both the thematic window and the debt window within InvestEU. And this year we have completed this project where we'll have 3 different floating technologies. So basically, we are ready to support this type of initiatives for floating wind farms in Italy as well, in the Mediterranean waters, and we can take on the initial risk, the scaling up risk. And on this, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Benissimo, ringrazio Alessandro Rizzo.
Thank you, Alessandro Rizzo. Give the floor to Bruno Rubino, Deputy Head of Climate and Social Finance Advisory Division, InvestEU Advisory. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Spada. Thanks to everybody. So, last but not least, as you say in English, I am called upon to speak about the InvestEU Advisory Hub. So I'd also like to start from the European Investment Advisory Hub, which is part of the IEF, and the Juncker plan. To give you an idea of the activity over the last 5 years of the advisory hub, the IAB has examined more than 2,500 applications for technical support and advisory support, which led to 260 real projects, of which 200 were reached funding almost 50%, actually more than 50%, with the Juncker plan, and the other portion with European Investment Bank provision. What changes with InvestEU? First of all, InvestEU, under a single umbrella, has 13 technical assistant programs. I think you know some of the names, Elena, Fina, EasyTA, just quite a few. The idea of the advisory hub is to offer technical and financial support. The idea is to have clearer indications, less acronyms, even though we love acronyms, and to provide an easier access to technical support. Over the last 5 years, the idea of the advisory hub is to be a kind of one-stop shop for promoters of projects, for project sponsors who are looking for an advisory function, who are looking for their technical capabilities to be extended, and all this to support them and put them on a path which can lead to a real financial operation, possibly using the centralized resources of the European Union. It's been said a number of times that the IB remains the main partner and implementer, but cooperation with other partners, CDP, for example, is part of the management model for the InvestEU Advisory Hub. So the idea is to use local knowledge and leverage respective strengths at the national and regional level, if possible. The advisory function mirrors the operational investment operations. Technically, these are called policy windows. Martina Gongo called it the thematic windows. Sustainable introduction, research, innovation, and digitalization in SMEs, social investment and skills. There's also an intersectoral window for cross-sectoral issues like investment platforms, just transition, and public and private partnerships. Then we have, we can call it a window, but it's a special program, JASPER, which, even though it's under the umbrella of the InvestEU Advisory Hub, works autonomously and provides advisory services on specific topics, such as just transition, adaptation to climate change, the impact of the invasion of Ukraine, and therefore special issues. I've spoken of policy windows, which are divided by sector and type of support. But in actual fact, when there are multiple advisory requirements, it's not enough to have one single kind of technical support. Often the requirements of a project or a company depend on the life cycle and the point at which the project stands. So the point of advisory operations is to start from the needs of the project holder to try and recruit necessary skills, combine them, and support the company and the project. the promoter of the project following a path which leads to a financial operation. This is the essence of our advisory function. With the advisory function, it's also possible to combine various skills. This is particularly useful when a project is on the cusp of a number of issues. For example, climate innovation, where a silo approach is not useful. What we need is a multidisciplinary approach, and this is possible through the advisory hub. But who are the main beneficiaries of the activity of the advisory hub? We said public authorities, companies, including SMEs and micro companies and financial intermediaries. Let's take them in order. Let's talk about the public sector, which is one of the strong points in the advisory activity. So this is technical assistance throughout the lifetime of the project, including climate, environmental, social, asset issues, vulnerability assessments, cost-benefit analysis, and gender-inclusive project design. The list of services is huge. What we really need to say is that with regard to the public administration advisory services are provided free of charge, which is important. The next, another project, I too am bringing you examples of advisory projects, particularly for Italy, for the public sector. Like I mentioned, the project which is still underway, the advisory hub provides support to the Italian Ministry of Justice. It's not an obvious action to do this, but we actually providing service to the jail, the prison system. The ministries asked the hub to provide it in social outcome contracting. What is social outcome contracting? In brief, it is a innovative form of social procurement where the extension of contracts to providers of services is linked to a measurable social impact and not simply the provision of services. By means of this project, by launching this social outcome contracting, the idea is that people serving prison sentence with innovative actions can be involved in work actions. So we're talking about inmates in the final portion of their prison sentence who can upskill or reskill, and if possible, again in the final part of their sentence, be found a job. Obviously, the job will continue once the inmate is released from prison. This is a major factor in the recurrence rate in Italy. There's about 68% of re-offenders with a cost of 130 million euros per year. So this could have a major socioeconomic impact, not just on society, but on the inmates who, once they leave prison, can continue in their jobs. Obviously, this is something which specifically excludes the support of the prison system, which is something which is actually prohibited in the European Investment Bank. So this is something which we've dealt with great care. Let's now move on to the private sector. Alongside the public sector, the main target And a major driver of investment is enterprises. There are many forms of support available in line with the various policy windows which we mentioned previously. If we ask what do most advisory services focus on for the corporate sector, I would say not exclusively, but to a large extent to innovation, environmental transition, digital transition. Here again, what is our goal? The goal is to sustain companies' projects with making their projects bankable, which is a term we like a lot. So making these projects acceptable to banking entities, and particularly the IAB. Market analyses and studies fall into this area, which are often useful to match up with the new market trends. We've carried out studies, for example, on circular economy, cybersecurity, on guiding and funding projects using drones. So leading edge projects, and again, this is a matter of providing support for new areas to create improving bonds between the world of science and research and the world of finance and investment. Very quick example. So we can just wait before we get to this slide. A Swedish company which developed, again, this is circular economy, a new textile fiber, making use of reused cotton fibers, which combined with other plant fibers led to a new textile fiber. You know the project. And they turned to the IB for their first commercial scale plant, and an ad hoc team, advisory experts and lending experts developed the business case and the financial model. They structured the loan with, and this led to a speedy due diligence, which allowed for more than an over 30 million loan. Second project, we can move on to the next slide, is a important study on SMEs in Italy on digitization. This is one of the priorities in the governance agenda. Despite progress made in clouds and online markets, the Italian companies are somewhat behind their European partners on the digital curve. Despite public intervention, this study showed that in Italy, there are still many weak points, many barriers for SMEs to adopt or approach digitization. I'm not going to enter into the details of the study, but one or two of the major problems highlighted were the levels of skills and knowledge of digitalization which restrict access and transition to digitalization. The second is the lack of specific financial instruments for digitalization. So among the various recommendations for every weak point, the report provided recommendations, but among other things, the strengthening of possible funding for this kind of transaction. Final slide. And here I wrap up as an example of advisory activity for financial intermediaries. I would, under InvestEU, I'd like to point out a program of technical support for microcredit operators and intermediaries funding social publishing. This is SIFTA, and it's the ideal continuation of MIZTA, which has as its goal to increase the technical capabilities of these financial intermediaries with the final goal for microfinance operators to provide microloans and the other operators to improve their credit volumes. What's involved here? These are a number of services, often customized. So there's customized training, specific training programs linked, for example, to the adoption of a code of good conduct, which is one of the requirements to have an operation with the IB. And finally, the rating of microfinance operators, and the rating activity has been extended to environmental, social, and governance assessments. So these are all new developments compared with the previous period. SIFTA's activities only just begun, and it's expected the first new services will be made available in the coming weeks and months. So that's what I have to say, and I will take any questions, of course.
Benissimo, ringrazio molto Bruno.
Thank you, Bruno Robino, for your very interesting contribution. Gilles Badeau wants to make a quick clarification. Well, I hope we explained what we do in practice, but I would like to be even more practical. In Rome, we have an office, and that's where you can come for all your questions, for all our activities. Andrea Clerici is the head of our offices in Rome, and he is always available here, and then he can redistribute all the information, the initiatives with all the colleagues, so that you can have a direct contact here in Italy. Thank you. If anyone has questions for our guests, but I think that they covered the subject matter well enough, so thank you very much. And Alessandro Tappi may now take the floor. And he's the Chief Investment Officer at the EIF. Good morning again to you all. I prepared a few slides to show the continuity of our work, but of course this session is aimed at getting rid of me so that no survivors will be left. So the EIF intermediates operations with funds, private equity, venture capital, etc., and banks. In fact, we work with the bigger set of financial intermediaries, including guarantee funds, and so far and so forth, and with the objective of guaranteeing funds to SMEs. We do that working with the EU budget in many sectors. Most of our lines of work are aimed at the SMEs, but then there is also a small activity that we do and has to do with investments in structural funds, which is very important, particularly for its contribution to the energy transition. Here you see the products and the thematic areas that we work with. We have 11 billion funds, and we hope to reach 145 billion euros of mobilized funds in terms of final entrepreneurs. This transition happens thanks to the fact that there is a blending of resources between the InvestEU resources and the EIF own resources. So, for example, if we are in a fund together with the other investors participating to the fund, we are never the main investor. We have 25% of the shares in the funds. Or when it's guaranteed, when it comes to guarantees for credit risk, we will guarantee the counterpart, but then that risk, if it were a guarantee fund, would be shared with the final investor, so the chain becomes longer, and everything is based on the idea that we share the risk with all the operators that are involved in this process. And we hope that through this mechanism, we will also be able to meet the new objectives of sustainability, of digitalization, etc. These are new objectives for us. It's not that new, not in the sense that they didn't exist earlier, but now we are tracking them down. Because now you no longer have to just be an SME in order to be supported. You have to be an SME plus. These are the new targets. There are a number of important thematic areas, and then there's a number of horizontal sub-objectives. We try to invest in funds that, for example, work with the companies that have a technological focus on climate and environment. But, for example, we also want to promote gender equality. So we prefer having, for example, women executives in the funds we are investing in. We look at the so-called ecosystem, because for things to work in venture capital terms, you need to find an entrepreneur who's willing to engage in this journey together, and so is willing to take on risks. So you will need a fund, and you will need a number of conditions to be met in order for such a development to happen. So in macroeconomic terms, it is essential that we strengthen the presence of investors, of fund managers, and entrepreneurs. Speaking of equity, also another point is that we try to cover the whole spectrum and stages of development from the moment in which the idea, the theoretical idea becomes is developed in terms of in commercial terms, or for example the business angels, which are not institutional funds investing, they are private investors who have been successful in the course of time in their startups, and they finance new startups. So, and at the ecosystem level, this initial stage, we can support it. And then we have tools that are more focused on the final phase. So the moment when the company is listed and an IPO is launched, or when the company grows and they become global competitors who also compete globally for funding. And at that point, from the provider's side of funds, of equity funds, it is important for these investors to be prepared to have deep pockets so that they can accompany the company even when it grows big. In the last 10-15 years, the failure to do so has led to a tendency to transfer such companies from Europe to the US. Because when you go global, you are looking for a global investor, and you're more likely to find it the other side of the ocean. This means loss of know-how, a loss of entrepreneurship for Europe, and so we try to tackle this in a transversal manner. What concerns the guarantees, this is perhaps the most obvious part of our work. We provide a guarantee, we share the risk with the financial intermediary to provide funding to SMEs. It may sound a little reductive because in fact the financial intermediary does huge work in trying to identify the SMEs that better fit this thematic definitions. And as you can see, there's quite a few of them. What is nice about InvestEU is that we work a lot internally to find the resources that better match certain projects, whereas so the entrepreneur just has to say, I would like to do A, B, and C, and then we do the rest. In terms of numbers, these are the IF funds. Infrastructural funds for climate are the only ones that have nothing to do with SMEs. All the rest is SMEs. The equity part, the guarantee part on innovation, sustainability, and so far and so forth. Since a couple of years, DIF has changed its strategic approach because, as was said, supporting SMEs is no longer enough. We want to support SMEs according to a thematic approach. Digitalization in a more eco-sustainable economy, interdependency, and the resilience of energy sources, this perfectly matches our priorities. But unfortunately, these funds are very welcome, but we have 11 billion, as you can see, organized along 7 years. 7 years in case we were ready to start last year, let's say 5 years, but 5 years for 27 countries and all these themes. If we compare this with the Juncker plan, it made more resources available to the EIF with respect to the resources that are made available today. So we need to be more selective. To date, we have received from potential intermediaries applications that are twice as much, that are more than double than the resources we have available. And so we cannot serve them all. We received yesterday 321 applications from financial intermediaries. So the demand is there, is very strong, and the problem is that we cannot serve it as we wish, but we hope in the future to have more resources. Thank you.
Simo.
I think this still alive. I think more concise than expected. I don't know if we have the responsibility to provide our conclusions. I don't know if anyone wants to take advantage of the fact that we have all these eminent speakers for a question. We're too exhaustive. So I'd like to ask colleagues from the Commission whether Antonio Parenti is with us already.
Ecco, allora sta arrivando, benissimo, così.
Okay, he's on his way. Here he is. Excellent. Antonio, do you prefer the rostrum or would you rather sit? Very good. I know that you're on a worldwide tour. You've been to Verona. Well, I can't say good morning because you spent the whole morning at a very high-level meeting. I'm very glad to conclude this event, which has been very intense for you. It was intense for me because we're both in Verona yesterday evening, and I was in there this morning. So I think I've contributed to the state's coffers with a few minutes.
Per quello. Vorrei comunque ringraziare.
I would like to thank Commissioner Gentiloni and Franco, Mr. Scanapieco, who's introduced us with the presentation of the first project signed by InvestEU in Italy, Mr. Clerici and his colleagues at AIB for the excellent organization, as well as all my colleagues from JECFIN and Fabrizio, the European Parliament, all the speakers for being with us. It's difficult to evaluate the importance of AIB. We know that Italy was the second beneficiary of the model which preceded InvestEU, the FC, the Juncker plan, which involved around 13 billion investments in Italy, with triggering further 66. And this was an important program which will be relaunched by InvestEU. The financial involvement in InvestEU is very significant for our country, and particularly in the current situation of economic uncertainty. But there are other aspects of InvestEU we can recall on this important day. First of all, it's important to recall that InvestEU, in its following its FC model, is an excellent example of interinstitutional cooperation at the European level with the Commission, the IB, governments, and national promotional agencies like CDP being involved in this cooperation. Experience has been built up at the European level, and we will continue to benefit from the knowledge of local areas for concerted activity at the European level with major impact in local areas. InvestEU is not just a model of institutional cooperation, and perhaps even more importantly, InvestEU is an excellent example of success and cooperation between the public and the private sector. This is because current and future challenges are so large that public investments, though essential, will not be enough. It'll be necessary to raise private investments too, and this is something which already occurred with FC, and this is a demonstration that a virtual cycle between public and private is possible. This obviously doesn't take anything away from the essential nature of public investments, and InvestEU will be sustaining investments in key sectors for Europe's supporting environmental investments, and we've seen some examples with regard to water management and other very important areas. One final aspect before I close is its intrinsic nature of supporting innovation, since it's an instrument to support investments in projects which normally run the risk of not finding investors. Funding of risky activities, such as those with high innovative content, is essential because it's on these projects that we need the highest, which have the highest long-term economic potential. And with this, on this note, I would like to thank you all, and I wish you very positive work and a very pleasant afternoon. So one practical point, there's lunch outside, which is offered by the EIB, I think, and because we're in under a spending review, so I'd like to encourage you to take advantage of it.